Hello and welcome to the Space Between Ideas. I'm Blaine Gates. In today's fireside chat, we're going to talk about the difference between 0 to 1 and 1 to several. Now, what's the difference between 0 to 1 and 1 to several? Basically, the idea is the simple answer is that from 0 to 1, it means that you are starting a new endeavor. You're starting a new project. You're starting a new company. You're doing something for the very first time. And 0 means that there is nothing happening, or you are not achieving the result that you want to achieve. Probably the most simple way to explain it is
I don't have any customers.
From 0 to 1, it's how did you get your first customer? And then from 1 to several is how did you get your first several customers? So these are kind of the same, kind of different, but like in what way? Remember that when we talk about what it means to achieve success, what does it mean to make progress? We're breaking down the concept into two ideas. One is to make plans, and the other is to create results. And so we follow this cycle where we're making a plan and then we act out the plan. And then according to the results, then we're going to make another plan. And then according to the plan, we're going to do the actions and then we're going to get some results. And it's just like a spiral. We just go up and up and up and up. But the question is it the same thing from 0 to 1 and from 1 to several? If we use the formula output, input, scenarios, choice, then it will show that there is a big difference between 0 to 1 and 1 to several. Let's start with the idea of think well. Think well means to plan. That is a 0 to 1 concept. And so where do we start? We start with output. I always start with output. Output, input, scenarios, choice. Let's start with output. Now, if I don't have a factory, then this concept output is going to be in the category of thinking. I need to think, I need to plan. If it's in the category of 1 to several, then all of a sudden it's not in the thinking area. It's actually in the doing. When I already have a process, when I already am getting results, when I already have a customer, then the first step is to measure. Measure the output. Look at the performance. Now, how is that different from 0 to 1? In that case, we're not actually measuring the output. We're not actually looking at the performance of our own processes, but we are thinking. We're looking at how other people have done this in the past. And it's a concept called benchmarking. Benchmarking is looking at best practices. It's looking at how other companies have done this in the past. It's looking at how perhaps similar companies are doing it in other industries. That's output. It can either be a thinking process for a new endeavor, or it is a measuring process if it is for our current endeavor. Next is input. And input, it's the same thing. So in the case where you're going from 0 to 1, I don't have a process yet, then input is a question of what's needed in order to begin production. What's needed for us to actually get something, to get some result. Now, I guess you could look at it from two different ways. The input, we're trying to get some kind of output. And so what specifically do we need in order for the factory to start working, meaning that we produce a product or a service? And then also at the same time, we can talk about like, what is it exactly that we need to do in order to get customers? In the way that I see business, these are the two fundamental areas. You have your product and service, and then you have your methods in order to sell that product or service. In general, we can break it down into three ideas. What are you doing to improve and develop your product and service? What are you doing to improve and develop your website? And that could be a physical location, your physical location or website, basically your storefront. And then what are you doing in order to advertise? And that can also be, it could be television commercials, it could be street signage, or it could be social media, it could be Google AdWords. But there's basically these three different ideas. You have the place where the exchange is made, and then on one side, it's how do you make the products and service, and then the other side is how do you get attention for that product or service. In either case, if you're going from 0 to 1, this is still a thinking process. We're trying to understand what do we need in order to produce. But If it's from a one to several process, then we're talking about still actions. What are the actual means of production? What are we actually using? Can we take inventory? Can we list the actual things that we're using in order to get those outputs? And can we take a look at the actual plan? We're reviewing, we're looking, we're measuring the output, and then we're taking inventory. We're trying to figure out what happened in the past and what is it that we can use as we move forward. Now, it's the same basic principle from 0 to 1, but we're not looking at our own data. We're looking at somebody else's data. And so I think it goes in the thinking and planning area, whereas from 1 to several, it is more about doing and measuring what we're doing. Then we hit the middle area. In the middle area, if you're going from 0 to 1, then we're talking about, okay, now let's go get that stuff we need to succeed. All right, let's go gather those resources. Let's go get that stuff. And then once we start putting that stuff together, like the IKEA furniture, then we'll know exactly how we're going to, move forward with this stuff. If it's from 1 to many, then what you're asking is, what happens when we need to make some changes, making improvements to the factory? In this case, when we get down to scenarios and choice, it doesn't matter if you're going from 0 to 1 or from 1 to several. In both cases, now we're talking about thinking. 0 to 1, we stay in the thinking column, and from 1 to several, then we move to the thinking column. In either case, we're talking about scenarios. And it's basically the same, create scenarios. If we flip over to the concept of lenses, remember there's 14 lenses. Currently, I like to use 14 lenses. There are 4 different lenses that talk about how to create scenarios. And we haven't really talked about any of these lenses yet. There's 4 different ways to talk about scenarios and how to think about scenarios. After we figure out what scenarios are probable, possible, what we should do, what we think we should do, when everyone adds their input, then eventually we need to make a choice. There are also 4 more lenses that can help us to think about making a choice. In the case of 0 to 1, then we move to action. We start doing the action. And in the case of 1 to several, again, we're doing the action. All right? So that's a way that you can think about from 0 to 1, 1 to several, going through the concepts of output, input, scenarios, and choice.